So continuing on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab is proud to present Dorothy Wray. Dorothy has been actively researching genealogy as a hobby for a little over 20 years, but in looking back, she realized she had an interest in it long before that. As a young girl, she knew that her maternal grandfather's grandfather came to Texas from Holland as a boy of 14 with his father and brother. It is known that the father soon passed away, and she is still looking for what happened to that younger brother. She has compiled 3 books of her family history and is now working on a smaller project on her husband's family. Dorothy is a member and former secretary of the Doña Ana County Genealogical Society in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and last year served as co-chairman of a genealogy fair sponsored by the Society and the local Family History Center. She's a volunteer in the genealogy collection at the Thomas Brannigan Memorial Library, where her major project is to create a digital index of obituaries from the local newspaper. She is also a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She has a Bachelor of Science in Home Economics from New Mexico State University and a Master of Science from Oklahoma State University. So without further ado, I would like to extend a warm virtual welcome to Dorothy.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I just got a tickle in my throat as we started here. So I would like to ask the class to hold their questions and comments until the end, and then I will try to answer or make other comments when I finish the presentation. Most of you have probably spent a lot of time and energy and maybe some money researching your genealogy. You have found out interesting things about your family and made some exciting discoveries. Maybe you have even uncovered some family secrets or found some black sheep in the family tree. You have all this information entered into a genealogy software program and filed in binders and folders, or it may be stacked on the corner of your desk, and yes, even on the floor. Now, what are you going to do with it? Your family members who are not very interested in genealogy are not going to open that genealogy software, and they're not going to dig through the files and binders. You have probably seen that glazed look in someone's eyes when you've shown them a pedigree chart all the way back to your 6th great-grandparents. Several months ago, I visited with a new librarian at our local library and asked her if she's interested in genealogy. She said, "No, I don't want to do all that research, but I do like to know what they found." You need to get that information out of the genealogy program and the files and into a format that will catch the attention of others and that they will read. It can be overwhelming to consider writing about your entire family history, and you will probably say, "I'm not finished yet." Well, genealogy is never finished because each ancestor leads to more ancestors and there are always brick walls. The idea is to get started. Write about a certain event in one ancestor's life. Tell about a document. Pick one ancestor and focus on his or her life. And don't forget to write about yourself. Who do you want to write the story of your life? Someone who has only pieced together a few things that they have found from bits of information? Or would you rather write it yourself and tell the whole? This is a matter of do as I say and not as I do, because I find it hard to write about those I've known best, myself, my parents, and my maternal. I have done a timeline for my in-laws with the help of my husband and my sister-in-law, but I need to do that for my side of the family. I need to write those little snippets of memories of growing up. Doesn't have to be long, just maybe a couple of sentences. Things like playing in the haystack with my cousins, or a story that my uncle told about my grandparents' courtship. I strongly urge you to talk with your relatives about the family history they know. You may not always have that opportunity. Each generation, family stories are lost. Today, I'll be giving suggestions about writing a book, but maybe a different format would work better for you. Postings on social media or a blog, short paragraphs in an email. Excuse me. Start by breaking the information down into small, bite-sized pieces that you might later put together into a larger project. This is a little sidebar about the project I'm working on now. My husband's oldest cousin will be having a significant birthday later this year, and I wanted to do something genealogy related for her. She and her daughter have helped me quite a bit with the recent generations of the family, and I have already shared my research with them. I decided to print a pedigree chart showing the ancestors back as far as they are known. I think it's 10 generations. As I was checking through that chart to see that everything was updated, I thought, these people have interesting stories, like the 7th great-grandfather who was hanged for treason to the king in Virginia colony in 1676 during Bacon's Rebellion, or the 4th great-grandfather who crossed the Delaware with Washington before the Battle of Trenton, or his grandson who fought on both sides of the Civil War. As you can tell, I like to see where ancestors fit into history. I don't know yet exactly what shape this project will take, maybe a booklet along with a pedigree chart. Your family history can take any shape that you want. Each project you do may be different from the others, and don't feel obligated to make your project like someone else's project. Writing has another advantage in that it will help you organize your findings so you can see how the pieces fit together and what is missing. As you write, be as accurate as possible and document the facts, but accept that there may be inaccuracies, new information may become available that will change the conclusions, and others may interpret the information differently. Be aware that possibly not everyone will agree with your conclusions. Maybe the story your grandma told about an event is different from the way her sister told it to her grandchildren, and those second cousins may disagree with what you have written. Or maybe the way Grandpa told the story is not exactly supported by the documentation you found, about big fish stories. If you have differing accounts of the same event, you can explain that there are variations in the story and attribute the variations to the sources. There are many resources available about how to write a family history. So,
Dorothy, can I interrupt just for a moment? I just wanted to let you know, are you still on the first slide? Because we're just seeing your introduction slide still.
Yes, I'm still there. I have a long bit to go before I get to the first slide. You can find resources both on the internet and in books. You'll find suggestions about interview tips and suggested questionnaires if you're writing a memoir. You can find information about how to make a narrative more interesting rather than just paragraphs giving the basic facts. Other resources give information about formatting, suggested fonts, layout, spacing, and so forth that will give a book a more professional appearance. Had I realized at the time I compiled my books that resources about writing a family history were available, I probably would have benefited from using them. But you know the expression, fools rush in where angels fear to tread, so I just jumped in and did my own thing. There are two main types of family history books, a genealogical book and a family memoir. A genealogical book has only descendant lists, family group sheets, and documentation. You may have seen books written in the descendant report style with long lists of names and dates. This is a typical style for family genealogy books, and it has many variations. By definition, a memoir is an account of events written by an individual who has personal knowledge of them. For our purposes, we will say a family memoir includes things you know about personally, as well as things that you have been told by other members of the family. You will probably be able to write more stories about the recent generations that you knew or that older family members have told you about. A family memoir has only stories and memories about the ancestors. Many family history books are a combination of styles with both documentation and memories. Even a photo album might be prepared with both some documentation and some memories along with pictures. Okay, here we go to the next slide. There are several things to decide when planning a family history book. First, who is the audience? Will it be strictly for family members? It may be less intimidating to think of writing a book just for your children or your siblings. Or would it be of interest to others, for example, your extended family or a local genealogical society or library? As I said earlier, there are two main styles of family history books, a genealogical book and a family memoir. Is it to be a genealogical book with only names, dates, and documentation? Or is it to be only a family memoir with just stories and anecdotes? Or is it to be a combination of styles? The books that I have done lean heavily toward the genealogical style because my purpose has been to record the documented facts about the ancestors, and that style is what I will focus on today and talk about some suggestions about how to present the documentation. Only genealogists get excited about pedigree charts, census reports, and death certificates, so I did write a narrative to explain the documentation and included family stories and traditions if known. On my father's line, my grandfather died many years before I was born, so I only knew my grandmother and heard the stories my aunts, uncle, and father told about their parents. Oh, how I wish now I could have paid more attention and could remember those stories. My father knew the names of his grandparents and that his mother's parents were born in England, but he had no stories to pass along to me about them. Next, which lines of the family will be covered and how many generations? I have a few books on other lines of the family tree done in the descendant report style that starts with ancestors back many generations and includes every known descendant until the point the book was published. Those books can be quite thick. They can be helpful in giving information about the early generations, especially if they have wills, deeds, and that kind of thing. But as always, with any genealogical information, verify that information for yourself. Those books cover more generations than suit my purposes. The books I have compiled cover 2 or 3 generations. I have been very careful in creating lists of descendants not to include generations which have living members. Birthplaces and mother's maiden names are often asked for security questions, and they can easily be found in genealogical files. Next, is it to be a pedigree format that starts with an individual and works back to their ancestors? The book I will be talking about today starts with my paternal grandparents, works back to their parents, and includes one set of their grandparents each. Or is it to be a descendant format that starts with an original ancestor and works forward to the descendants? The first 2 books I did were on my maternal grandfather's side and worked forward from the great-grandfathers, the family patriarchs. And that's as far back as research has been done to the present before hitting brick walls. Or you might want to choose one ancestor and tell about all of his or her siblings. Those collateral relatives have interesting stories as well, and you may be the only one who's collecting them. Whichever format is used, keep it manageable. Is historical background to be included? Historical background can help to make dry narrative more interesting by placing ancestors in the context of the time they lived. William Sharp's Valentine and Helen Smith were my grandparents, my father's parents, and this is the book I have compiled about them and their ancestors, and I will be using examples from the book to illustrate points today. As I just mentioned, this is actually the 3rd family genealogy book that I have compiled. In 2005, I organized a family reunion for my maternal grandfather's line with 3 different branches of the family attending. By that time, I had made connections with several different 2nd and 3rd cousins, and I have found that different lines of the family know different things about the ancestors. As we sat there that day sharing at the reunion, I thought someone needs to write down all of this information in one place. As we looked forward to another reunion in 2007, I finally figured out that someone was, and that's how I got started writing family history. I prefer to say that I have compiled a book because, as I said earlier, my primary purpose is to gather the basic documentation plus other information into one place. As I researched the various lines, I decided that the known information needed to be written down so other family members would have a starting point if they become interested in genealogy, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel, as the expression goes. My books are a combination of the 2 styles, but lean heavily toward the genealogical style, as I said. The books I have compiled are not meant to be a formal genealogical report, and I know they do not meet the genealogical proof standard. That was not my purpose. At the time I began working on this book in 2017, my sister and I had one first cousin on this side of the family still living. It took me about a year longer than I had intended to complete the book. And because as I worked on it, I decided I needed to do more research in several areas. But I did just feel that I needed to compile the known information sooner rather than later, even though there are still brick walls even now. I'm glad I completed the book when I did in 2018 because our cousin just recently passed away. I was able to get the information to him and his family before he passed away. I don't care for the descendant report style because it seems to have just too much repetition over the generations. Family Tree Maker is the genealogy software that I use, and so that's what I am familiar with. I did the first book before its book publishing option was available. I don't have publishing software, so I created my own format and have continued to do so. I primarily used Microsoft Word with some forms created in Microsoft Excel, some photos edited with Adobe Photoshop Elements, and some graphics created with a Printmaster program. My computer skills are pretty basic, so I use the old-fashioned cut and paste method to assemble some of the pages and then scan them because Word can have layout issues keeping inserted images where you want them on the page. In preparing for this program, I decided that I did need to try Family Tree Maker's book publishing option for comparison. Obviously, all the information to be included in the book needs to be in the program, and mine isn't. I only did one small section of the book as an example, and I had to start by adding documents and media from other locations on the computer and saving charts and reports to be used. I had a bit of a learning curve to get things put where they were supposed to be, and the overall appearance is a little different from the format I created, but I do know now how to compile a book using Family Tree Maker. There are also other genealogy programs that are available now that might be used. Many of the things I'm going to tell you today would apply whether you were going to create your own format, use a publishing program, or use a book publishing option within a genealogy software program. You have to get the documents together in order to begin. I have always included an introduction that tells the reader why I wrote the book, explains what it covers, acknowledges sources and individuals who have contributed, and suggests areas for future research. I have tried to make it clear that the book is not the final word on the family story because new information may become available and others may make different interpretations. Of course, I hope that some of the brick walls will eventually be broken down. It is important to be consistent with the order if you have different generations, such as the different sections on my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. As a point of reference for someone reading this book, I began with a pedigree chart based on the 4 children of my grandparents, and I know this may be a little difficult for you to read the fine print, but it is just to serve as an example for you to see. This pedigree chart is based on the 4 children of my grandparents, my father, and his siblings. This serves as an informal table of contents for the book. I hope the children and grandchildren of my sister and cousins will recognize the names in the left column, my father and his siblings, and will be able to see the relationship with the ancestors following my grandfather's line, the Valentines to the Jacksons, and my grandmother's line, the Smiths to the Marshes. And you can see on the right-hand side, there are lots of brick walls still waiting to be hurdled. Because there are 5 sections in this book, I followed each section title page with a family group sheet for that particular family. These 2 charts were obviously just printed from Family Tree Maker. As I mentioned earlier, I wrote a narrative that explained the documentation. This is the top of the first page of my grandparents' narrative. This tells in more or less chronological order the story of the family, when and where each individual was born, where they lived, who they married, and so forth. The Smart Stories option in Family Tree Maker creates a story using the basic facts that you have entered, but it is rather stilted and based on just one individual. However, it can be edited to add more information and make it more personal. This is the lower portion of that first page of my grandparents' narrative. I always wondered why my grandparents moved from Pennsylvania first to Alamogordo in New Mexico Territory, and then on to El Paso, Texas. In the Alamogordo News of August 23, 1899, I found an article about a group of Scranton, Pennsylvania businessmen who were interested in the development of the lumber industry in the new town of Alamogordo, which may explain why my grandfather, a carpenter living in Scranton, thought moving west to the growing community might provide a good business opportunity for him. Another article in late 1900 said that El Paso was doing more building than any other city in the country. Those articles provided some simple historical background that could be inserted into the narrative. Notice I said my grandfather apparently felt moving west was a good opportunity. I didn't say that's definitely why he moved, because I really don't know. That may have been talked about during family visits, but either I was too young or sitting on the floor playing or reading a book and not paying attention. As with all genealogical research, be careful not to make assumptions about an ancestor's motivation for doing something, unless you have documentation, such as a letter or a diary giving their reasons. Just say this is a possibility for why they moved or did whatever. This book is the first one in which I included a timeline for the family. I created my own form using Microsoft Excel. This is the first timeline page for my great-grandparents, James and Mahala Jackson Valentine, with the date, event, and a brief source listed. Major historical events might be included for context. Family Tree Maker does have a timeline tab that could be used, but again, it is only based on one individual, whereas the ones I created are based on the couple and their children. Even though my books are not primarily photo albums, if I have them, I like to include pictures of the ancestors. I'll put this right at the very front of their particular section. I might also include other pictures of children when they were young or homes where the family lived if I have those. For these pictures of my grandparents, I believe I was able to manipulate Word to create the page and place the pictures where I wanted them. Also, if I have them, I like to include pictures of the children as adults. Obviously, it is important to give the names and include the dates if known. This picture on the left is my great-grandmother, Mahala Jackson Valentine. On the right, her son, Charles Jackson Valentine. On the left, his son, James Valentine, and then his daughter, Ellen, to create the 4 generations in the picture. And the other picture is my great-uncle Caleb with his wife, Minnie. These pictures I had to create by cut and paste because Word kept moving them. When I put them on the page, thought I had it done, and I would go back, and that Word had moved them some other position. After I gave this presentation to our Genealogical Society, I was reminded that pictures can be inserted into an Excel spreadsheet with much more satisfactory results than trying to insert pictures into a Word document. We often start our research with census reports and vital records. This is the federal census of 1900 for Alamogordo in New Mexico Territory. I drew an arrow at the bottom in the margin to call attention to the name, as sometimes these forms can be very difficult to read. It is not really an issue with census images because none of us have the originals of those. But if you do have an original copy of something like a newspaper or a wedding certificate or something like that, do not make any marks on that original copy. Make a photocopy of it and then draw the line or underline the words on the copy only. While we are looking at this page, let me make a comment about orientation. Many of the pages in the book are printed in portrait orientation, but there are plenty of pages that are in landscape orientation, such as this census report. Be consistent in the way you turn the landscape pages to be bound, either left or right, so that the reader only has to turn the book one way when reading. This page is printed in landscape orientation, and you will notice the small label in the lower right corner of the page. That would be the top of the page in portrait orientation as the book is bound. And this briefly cites the source for the document. As you know, in genealogy, citing the source for a document is key so that others will be able to locate it. You will probably want to include a more complete list of source citations elsewhere in the book, for example, at the end of each family's narrative. In the introduction, I said that most of the documents were found at Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, with some of those family search images found at the local Family History Center. I also noted that the originals of items listed from the personal papers of my father are now in the possession of my sister. Because the census images can be hard to read, I included a transcription. You might use the blank forms available at Ancestry.com, for example, and fill in the information by hand. I prefer to use a program, www.censustools.com. And if you can see down in the lower left corner, it's written there, censustools.com. This is a program that has the fillable template that you can fill out the information and then save and print the form. When I did the first book, the program could be downloaded for free. Then later a donation was requested, and now it costs $11.95. That program has templates for all of the United States federal census reports, some of the special census reports such as agricultural, slave, and mortality schedules, plus some state census reports and spreadsheets for Canada, England, Scotland, and Ireland. When the 1940 census became available, I was able to download the transcription form for free, and I assume it will be the same with the 1950 transcription form when that census is released in 2022. There may be other software programs available that will do the same thing. At the time I was working on this book, I did not realize that the transcription forms for the English census reports were available through the program. So I developed a similar program for my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Marsh, using an Excel spreadsheet. The 1861 English census indicates he was born about 1800, and at the time of the census, he was residing at 20 Elm Street in St. Altman Parish of Derby in Derbyshire. Vital records can sometimes be difficult to find. I have sometimes found birth and death records listed in an index, but the actual digital image is not available at the present time. In that case, I have included a copy of the search results. These are two search results placed side by side, and they record the death of Joseph Marsh of St. Altman Parish in Derby between October and December of 1862. But as you can see on the left side, no image is available. Last fall, our Genealogical Society and the local Family History Center co-sponsored a genealogy fair. I took a class on researching British ancestors and learned that some death records are available from Her Majesty's General Register Office. When reading the instructions on the website, I found that the listing in the index gave the information that I needed. I needed to know it was in Derbyshire, and it was volume, and the volume and the page numbers were listed there. And I can't remember, it seems to me maybe this register entry number was also required. I ordered a copy of the record as a PDF file by email for £7. That was $8.62, plus a 25-cent international transaction fee on my credit card. If I'd wanted a hard copy, it would have cost more. I was hoping to learn the names of Joseph's parents, but unfortunately, English death records do not list parents' names. However, this record does give me some more information. Joseph Marsh of 20 Elm Street died of natural causes on October 24, 1862, and my great-grandmother, Maria Marsh, was present. This indicates that Maria was still living at home with her father at the time. Using this date of death and the date of the 1861 census, I can calculate that he was born between April 9th and October 23rd, 1799. As you know, genealogy is never finished, and now I have a revision to make for the book. If I was going to print more copies of the book, I would change Joseph Marsh's dates on the Pedigree Chart, the family group sheet, and in the narrative, and remove the pages with the search results. However, at the moment, I don't plan to print any more books. So I printed copies of the death record and wrote a short paragraph and sent them to the people who got the books, and also added that information to the online version. Older civil and church records are often handwritten and can be difficult to read. I enhanced several pages using Photoshop elements in order to sharpen the writing and get it dark enough. I found my great-grandparents, George Smith and Maria Marsh, listed in a New Jersey marriage index on Family Search. And that led me to the actual image. The header at the top of the page of the image shows that it is for Newark and Essex County, New Jersey, but the list of names, it is a little difficult to read. So I zoomed in and took a screenshot and placed that at the bottom of the page so the details can be read more easily. Newspapers can sometimes be a good source of information about a family and can help you write their story. As I said, my grandfather died many years before I was born, so I really know very little about him. At Chronicling America on the Library of Congress website, I found the El Paso Herald in the years 1910 to 1919 have been indexed and are searchable by name. I found many articles about the Valentine family, which helped me to learn about them as persons. As I found an article, I used the snipping tool, which is an accessory in Windows, to cut out the article and then pasted them in working folders in my pictures. As I clipped every article about the family, but by the time I got to about 1914 or 15, there were more and more articles, and I only clipped the articles that were significant. In total, I clipped about 185 articles, and then I had to decide which ones to actually use in the book. This was to show the variety of activities in which the family participated. Many of the images on Chronicling America are not very clear, and again, I had to enhance those using Photoshop elements. I decided to use about 60 articles printed over the 10 years, and you can see these are rather short articles, just about a meeting that they went to or something very simple like that. This is where my cut and paste skills came in handy as I printed the chosen articles, then scanned the pages. Again, this could have been done using an Excel spreadsheet to insert the articles onto the page. You will notice that I underlined the names here to highlight them, and they have been enhanced by yellow here. My grandparents and great-grandparents lived in cities whose city directories are now online. As I found them, I copied all the pages into my working file and included all of the listings in the timeline at the front of their section. However, I only used selected images in the book, primarily to show the family's moves around the city or changes in occupation or family situation. Here I have drawn an arrow by the name of my great-grandfather, George Smith, a shoemaker, in the 1861 Newark City Directory. This is a significant city directory to include because this is the earliest record I can positively identify him in the United States. I've not been able to identify him on the 1860 federal census. So this city directory of 1861 at least gives me a hint as to when he immigrated from England. I like to track down family properties. When we first started researching the Valentine family, my sister made connections with a third cousin back in New Jersey. At one point, she had hired a professional genealogist who had found some deeds for my great-great-grandfather, Abner Jackson, in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. When I was working on the Jackson family, I decided maybe I should see if I could actually find those deeds. Family Search does have a lot of deed books and things like that online, and so sure enough, they had Luzerne County. But those books are not indexed, and I had to search the images for the deeds. Thankfully, the genealogist who had prepared the report for my cousin had listed the deed book and the page number. So I just had to search through pages and pages and pages of deeds in order to find them. This is the last of 5 deeds for the Jackson family. Old deeds are often written in boilerplate style. It's a standardized form with text that can be copied into legal documents with a little change from one deed to the other, like a fill-in-the-blank form that we would use today. A lot of this section at first is boilerplate with the details of the transaction inserted into the standard text, and then followed by the legal description and concluding with more boiler text. Are you finding that one interesting to read? It's hard to read. And this was the best of them. The one from 1830, the penmanship was not good, and the print had kind of faded a little bit, and it was a challenge to transcribe. Because the old deeds that were handwritten can be hard to read, I included a copy of the deed and a partial transcription of it. It is important to transcribe all of the deed pertinent information, such as the names of the buyers and the sellers, the price, the legal description of the property, the date the contract was signed, and the witnesses, and so forth. There may even be a separate part of the deed, in especially older times, where the woman had to sign that she was selling this property of her own free will, and her husband was not present at the signing of that particular part of it. Sometimes a deed may even include a sketch of the property, as this one did. Here again, I was able to use the snipping tool to cut the image from the deed and to include it in the transcription. If I had been able to locate this sketch on a modern map, I would have loved to include it in the book to show where the property actually is today, but I never could find it, couldn't place it. I have not found a satisfactory way to print a page directly from Find a Grave without all the unnecessary advertisements and information that you see on the website, so I adapted the page with the pertinent information. This is the gravestone of Abner Jackson in the West Auburn Cemetery in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. These two pictures are of the same gravestone with different lighting, and I believe they probably used shaving cream to enhance the writing there on the right picture. As you can see, I have listed the website with the memorial identification number and given credit to the woman who created the page and the photographer. For a couple, I would put both names on the same page if they were buried in the same cemetery. However, you do have couples where one partner died, the family moved on, and the other then died later, and the couple is buried in separate cemeteries, so I would do separate pages for those. There are many other forms of documentation that you might want to include: military records, immigration and naturalization papers, homestead applications, church records, tax lists, and so forth. If you have personal letters or diaries, copies or transcriptions of those would be a treasure to include. Be sure you cite the source for all the documents. Once I had prepared a draft copy of all the documents I wanted to include in the book, I needed to proofread carefully to catch spelling and typographical errors, as well as check for sentence structure, grammar, punctuation, consistency, and formatting, and so forth. Especially important was to double-check dates. As you know, it can be so easy to invert numbers in dates. I also asked my sister to proofread the draft in order to see whether she found any other errors and if everything made sense to her. Because of the types of books they are with a limited audience, family history books are generally self-published rather than published by a commercial publishing company. By a commercial publishing company, I mean one where the author submits a proposal for a book and gets a contract, and then the company takes over and produces and markets the book, and the author receives royalties. Self-publishing is different in that the author retains all or most control over the book, pays for the printing of the book, and then recovers expenses by selling the book to others. If you search the internet or look for advertisements in genealogy magazines, you will find numerous companies that will guide you through the self-publishing process. A book published that way often looks very professional. If you use a book publishing option of a genealogy software program like Family Tree Maker, there will be instructions there about how to get it published. Other options are to use a local company that specializes in offset or print-on-demand printing, or a local copy shop. I had my books printed at the local copy shop because I was only having a very limited number of copies printed. You will want to research the various options for printing and decide which is best for you based on the number of copies that you would like to have. I would not recommend printing your book at home on your home printer. I have a printed master copy of the first 2 books that I took to the local copy shop, and they used that to print the appropriate numbers. As I was working on this book, in addition to the printed draft version, I saved each page in a Word file, inserting the photographs and charts and scanned documents where they fit. I was then able to put that completed file on a flash drive. I knew that in addition to their own printed copies, my sister and cousin would want printed copies for their families. So the flash drive was what I took to the copy shop for them to print. The granddaughters of my uncles have expressed a little interest in genealogy, but I didn't want to print any more books. So using the Word file, I created a Google account and sent the link to them by email. That way, they can access the book and download it themselves to their computers if they would like. There are several other sites besides Google that could be used. I have not done the books as a money-making venture, only to pass along family information. I have only asked for reimbursement of the cost of printing, binding, and postage. However, several people have been very generous in their reimbursements, and a couple of people never paid. Let's talk a minute about digital technology and the future of your research. We all know how rapidly technology changes. How permanent will your research be? If you have been researching your family history for a while, can you still use that genealogy software program when you first started? I can't. Will someone in your family be committed to upgrading your computer files for the next 100 years or longer? Will the cloud still be there? Last year, my second cousin loaned me some great-grandfather, the year he courted and married our great-grandmother, 1873. He probably bought that little diary in the general store in Denison, Texas, and it certainly is not made of archival paper. The pages are slightly yellowed, and the corners are a little brittle, but the diary is in pretty good shape considering it is 147 years old. Granted, it probably has not been handled much in the last 100 years or more, and my cousin has it stored away carefully. I scanned the pages so I can share them with my first cousins, but I think that little diary will still be legible long after those scans I made are no longer accessible. It's something to think about. Now that you have been researching your family history for a while and made lots of interesting and wonderful discoveries, you might like to share them with others in your family. You and I know stories about our parents and grandparents that even our children don't know. Not long ago, I said something about my grandparents, and our son said, "I've never heard that story." I didn't realize he didn't know it. I encourage you to start writing down those memories. Create a short family memoir, even if you don't plan to publish a book. If you decide to write a family history book, of course, it will be different from the ones that I have compiled, with a different purpose and focus, a different style and format, and of course, a different audience and content. I hope I have given you some ideas on how to write a family history, items to include, and suggestions about how to prepare the copy. There are as many ways to write a book as there are books to be written. Each book is unique. Now, go write your own family history. And now I'll be ready to take any questions or comments.
Okay, Dorothy, that was wonderful. So I'll invite the class to go ahead and any questions you have, please click them and write them in the chat box. In the meantime, Dorothy, I have a couple things I'd like to ask you.
Okay.
The one thing that we've really been stressing in this class, and my class has been meeting now for I think a little over 3 years or so, and one thing I've been really stressing is write your story. You know, you do not have
Yes.
to be a professional writer. You don't have to be a published author. You know, and there, like you pointed out so perfectly in this presentation, it doesn't have to be that 500-page, you know, professionally published, bound hardcover book, you know, that you see in a lot of genealogy libraries.
Right.
You know, it could be something as simple as, like you said, taking your Microsoft Word documents down to the local printer, using a spiral ring binder, and publishing them, and then just, you know, like you said, sending them to your friends and relatives or extended relatives.
Right.
And I think that's a really wonderful thing that I'd really like to make the class think about for a moment, because the one thing I've been saying for years now in this class is don't wait for the next generation to do it. You have to write your family history now, because with every person who passes, all that wonderful family information goes with that person. There's an expression that every time someone passes, a whole library goes with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot emphasize this enough. In the last month, I have lost my uncle, which was my mother's brother, and I've lost my aunt, which was my dad's sister, and then my very favorite second cousin, who's about 15 years older than I am, had a stroke like over the last couple of weeks. So in the matter of a month, you know, 3 major sources of my family history have either passed or are in very, you know, bad health right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it can happen so quickly. I mean, I have just been, you know, struggling myself over the last few weeks with all this family tragedy. But luckily, because I've been working on my genealogy for over 20 years, you know, I have many, many, many hours of taped conversations with the people who just recently passed on. You know, I've worked with them for years to switch family photos to make sure that everybody has, you know, copies. So if one person passes, you know, those copies don't get lost that they had, and, you know, they're not the only person who had those copies. So I can't emphasize enough, you know, don't wait to be that perfect author, you know,
Right.
under the perfect circumstances to publish your family history. You know, it doesn't have to be 500 pages. You know, you made some very wonderful points about you just start off with some short little writings and then compile those writings, and, you know, one builds onto the other. And, you know, it doesn't have to be that strict pedigree book if you don't want to, or it could be, you know, pedigree and memoir, you know, combined. The one thing I really took from this presentation is you are the writer, you are the
Right.
creator, and that book can be anything you want that book to be. And I just thought that today's presentation, um, you know, demoed that so wonderfully, and I'm just tickled pink with it. We often say in my class that you want to put the meat on the bones of your ancestor, and I think that today's presentation has really exemplified how, by writing a memoir or family history, you know, family memories, can really put that meat on the bones of your ancestor. You know, like the story about the military history, you know, that kind of thing that you went over. I just thought that that was a really wonderful example. And then let's see here, I was taking some notes. Oh, you mentioned collateral ancestors
Yes.
are interesting as well. And I got to tell you a short story I recently had with collateral ancestors. I belong to several local lineage societies, and we all have newsletters. And, you know, as with all lineage societies, we're always struggling to fill up those newsletters with interesting stories. And one of my lineage societies, it's a pretty small group. There's only about 8 people in my chapter. So, you know, we've all written about our, you know, ancestor that that particular lineage society is interested in. So we decided to start writing about the collateral ancestors as
Right.
well. And I got to tell you, it's been wonderful reading, and it's been wonderful writing, and every little article that you write is yet one more practice to publishing your own book. And that's another thing I've been stressing in my class is, you know, start with 1-page write-ups on each ancestor, you know, or maybe, you know, a double-sided, like 1-page double-sided. And you would be surprised how quickly you could fill a book. And a book, like I said, does not have to be 500 pages. It could be 40 pages. It could be 50 pages. And if you combine, like you so beautifully shown in your presentation, if you start including things like census records, newspaper articles, that very quickly fills that pages up. So you may only have 20 pages of writing, but you might have 30 pages of death certificates and census records and newspaper articles. So it's really not that hard, to come up with, a simple family history book.
I can certainly relate to your losing family members. Back in March, within 9 days, we lost this cousin that I mentioned and my sister-in-law, and hers was totally unexpected. Just wham, they were gone. And I had relied on them to, give me family history. And like I said, you may just write a sentence or two. I've seen some suggestions. Keep a document, a Word document on your computer, and if you think of something, go write down that particular thing. Not long ago, I thought I was planting pansies, and I thought, oh, well, my uncle used to bring us pansies, or probably brought pansies, maybe 1 or 2 years. And we would be eating lunch, and here he'd come to the back door with this flat of pansies, and I thought, I need to write that down. Just little things, maybe a sentence or two, not much, but after a while, you'll have a collection of things that you just thought of. And then
Absolutely.
You can organize it. If you need to organize it, you can.
Dorothy, are you aware of StoryCorps?
No, I'm not.
StoryCorps is through the Library of Congress, and it's a free app that you can download onto your phone or your iPad or your computer, and it turns your device into a recording, like a tape recorder. Mm-hmm. And you can, I think the maximum recording is 30 minutes, but you can sit down and record your family history orally, like you could sit down and talk to your aunt or your uncle or your brother, your sister, whatever the case may be. And you can sit there and very casually in your own home and talk to them about your family history. And then you can store that record permanently at the Library of Congress. And it's a completely free program. And so I want to encourage my students, if you never get around to writing your family history, and I hope you do, but if you never get around to writing it, please record it and store it for, forever in the Library of Congress, because what the Library of Congress is trying to do is they're trying to capture the history of Americans, in that, everyone's individual life. And it doesn't matter whether it's a story about, when you were, 5 years old in school, or whether, it's a story of, going to, first day of high school. It doesn't matter. It's whatever story you want to tell, StoryCorps wants you to record it, and they will store it for free. And because it's digital, you can share those digital recordings with your other family members or friends or whatever the case may be. So I encourage everyone, if you don't feel the ability or the want to write, please record your oral history stories and store them on StoryCorps. Another point that Dorothy made that I think is really wonderful is, Dorothy, you hit on the topic of your book didn't necessarily meet the genealogical proof standard, but I think that's a really valuable point that you made. Not all books have to meet the genealogical proof standard. We all strive for that, of course, but unless
I think that may intimidate people because they think, oh, I've got to get it perfect. Well, you don't.
I think that was an excellent point, totally excellent point, because, if we all strive to meet the genealogical proof standard, we may never publish, so, like you so wonderfully stated, in the beginning of your book, you just state in your introduction the shortcomings of your research and, leave it up to the next generation or 2 generations or 3 generations from now to pick up where you left off. But as long as you're citing your sources and you're using, the knowledge that you have on hand at the time you're writing it, that is a very valid point. And I just thought, that's wonderful.
Get these things written down before they are lost.
Absolutely. The point you made about how, your children or your grandchildren are never going to pick up those 25 binders that you have in your basement that you spent 20 years researching, because they're not going to have the passion. So summarizing everything that you have and putting it in a book form is much easier. About 2 years ago, I think, Dorothy, I shared with you when we did the sound test earlier this week, I wrote a short book, like just 40 pages, just very, very short book. But the one thing I found is that when I published it and I gave it to my older relatives in hard book form, They were thrilled. My older relatives were thrilled, but my younger relatives, my nephews and nieces, they all said, "Oh, but Aunt Sue, I want this in digital. I don't want this in paper." Like it doesn't do us any good. We don't want this paper sitting around our house, even though it was in a book form. So, something to be learned about the difference in generations. Now, of course, I have a feeling that the older my nephews and nieces get, the more they'll like the experience of holding a book. But for now, in their younger years, they're all digital, and that's what they're all about is digital.
But as I tried to make the point at the end, that digital technology may change, and what's on a digital thing right now may not be accessible in 50 years.
Here's a great example of that. I paid good money a couple of years ago to have a lot of my old VHS tapes converted over to DVDs. Well, now you're hard pressed to find any computer that knows how to accept a DVD, So now I'm going to have to spend more money and convert those DVDs over to digital. So, that's a point well taken, that technology changes really fast, which, as a librarian, I guess I'm kind of partial to having that old-fashioned book in my hand.
I like books too.
but I have a feeling, even as time and changes and technology changes, I have a feeling that the good old-fashioned book will be the one that survives. So let's see here. I wanted to also point out that was a great suggestion about reaching out and using local newspapers to answer the question as to why your ancestor may have moved there. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example of something I found in my own research. I had an ancestor, my mother's uncle, who disappeared. He literally just disappeared off the face of the earth when he was in his 20s, and no one ever heard from him again. And it took me several years, but I cracked it. But one of the processes that I used in trying to crack it, I knew from the family history, the oral family history that had been handed down through the generations, that the family thought that his disappearance was because he ran away and joined the service. And so one of the sources I used in trying to answer the question was looking in the local newspaper where he lived before he disappeared, trying to find, and I spent countless Saturdays at the LDS library going through old microfilm of newspapers before it was all digitized like it is today. But I spent countless Saturdays going through the old newspapers, 1 inch at a time on microfilm. Right. And I was looking for an article to explain or what might inspire a young person who was in his 20s to just disappear. What article was it in the local newspaper that might have inspired him to run away and join the army? And I actually found, by going through those old newspapers, some pretty good possibilities. I found some very provocative articles in the newspaper at the time as to what was going on in the particular part of the United States where supposedly he went to join the army. So, I may have found my question, but, really the point I was trying to make is that was a great point that you made. There may be the answer to why your ancestor did something or went somewhere based on reading the local newspapers of the time.
Actually, when I was looking through that newspaper, I was looking for mentions of my grandfather's name. And I saw this, just popped up in front of my face, about these Scranton businessmen who were investing in the lumber industry. And I thought, oh, now I know.
Exactly. Absolutely. Let's see here. Also, you mentioned timelines. I really wanted to stress to the class, I know we've talked about timelines in the past, but I really wanted to stress to the class how important a timeline is. Not just for the point that, that you were showing, which was a wonderful illustration, but also, I got to tell you, it is a great way to find the shortcomings in your research. When you're sitting there looking at the screen on Ancestry.com or Family Search, it's really hard to see, just by looking at your profile for your ancestor, the shortcomings in your research. But by doing that timeline, and I don't know if I think at least some of the people in my class have hired professional genealogists to help them with their work. And the one thing that is consistent in most of the work I've seen that my class has brought to me that were done by professional genealogists is the timeline. The timeline is always there in all the reports that the genealogists do. So, obviously, if professional genealogists are using timelines to assist them with their research on your family, obviously, if you use timelines, it's a wonderful clue as to find out, the shortcomings. Because really, a lot of our brick walls is not necessarily a brick wall. It's just simply a shortcoming in our research about that ancestor. And sometimes having that timeline can really show you where that weak spot in your research was, so you can go back and exploit that weakness and hopefully find the answer. And then I also wanted to, I wrote a note here, the point you made about taking the transcription of the census record, and also I believe it was a will, if I took my notes correctly, because so many people would look at the original handwriting, like you said, the penmanship on the original will, and how many people, especially if it's on paper, it's a copy of the original on paper, even with Photoshop enhancing, it's really hard to read that. So I thought the idea of doing the transcription was a fabulous suggestion, and I hope the class will think about that when, hopefully when they publish their own family history, because the transcription idea was a wonderful idea. What was the name of that software again that you said you were using?
www.censustools.com for the census.
Wonderful.
And I have it listed there in the handout.
Wonderful. And then let's see here. Oh, and once again, I wanted to point out one of the things I really appreciated about what you've done with your book is keeping the the citation information consistent on the right-hand side of the page. I thought that was an excellent idea, because not all of us are going to be able to do a footnote section in the back of our book, or a bibliography in the back of our book. That's a lot to ask for people who are simply more interested in preserving their family history rather than never writing it. So I thought the idea of the consistency with your citations on the lower right-hand side was a great suggestion.
Actually, it's at the top of the book as the book is bound. On that particular thing, it was a landscape format. So it is at the top corner of every page.
Wonderful. Okay. And then you mentioned the importance of directories, and I wanted to point out, because I know I've had a lot of people new to my class since last February when I went to Roots Tech in Salt Lake City. But one of the classes I took at Roots Tech in Salt Lake City this last February was a class put on by MyHeritage, the company, that's a subscription database, MyHeritage. And they redid their whole collection of city directories. And they added artificial intelligence to it, so you can actually search by the address if you would like, to find out all the people that have lived at that address over the years, and you can also do it by the name of the wife as well. So by them adding artificial intelligence to their database of city directories, you're now not just forced to do it the old-fashioned way, which was looking for the husband's name, in the directory, and then having to go through all the names. You can actually add the husband and wife's name together to help quickly find it using artificial intelligence. So I wanted to point that out to the class. And then let's see here. Hold on. One thing you mentioned was proofreading. I got to tell you, I want to second that, because even though my book was rather short, it was only 40 pages. I proofread it 1,000,000 times, and then my husband proofread it probably not 1,000,000 times, but a bunch of times. And I got to tell you, I thought we had it down pat. I sent it to the publisher. It came back, and there were like 4 typos.
And they just glare at you when you see them.
Absolutely. So I got to tell you, for everybody out there in the audience, not just 2 people proofread it. See if you can get 5 people to proofread it, because I got to tell you, I thought we had it down pat. But boy, when it came back from the publisher, I was pretty shocked at, the things that got away from us. And then I wanted to also point out to the class, because I so encouraged the class to do their family history, to write it down and publish it. For those of us who are not really good typists, there are also really cheap and inexpensive dictation tools available for you. If you have Microsoft Word on your computer at home, it has a dictation tool built in, and you can activate that. And there's lots of other software for your phone, for your iPad, that you can now dictate. And then you can go back later and edit it if there's any, problems with the dictation from your voice onto the paper. So I encourage everybody, if you are not a writer and you don't want to write, consider either using StoryCorps to record it orally and store it on the Library of Congress website, or use your own personal computer and use your dictation ability, so you don't have to sit down and keyboard everything yourself. So with that, let's see here. I'm looking at the chat box. One person said, just a thought on when you print copies, please consider donating your published family history to your local genealogy library. The Sutro Library in San Francisco would love a copy or 2. for their genealogy collection. Hardbound is preferred as it is better for long-term preservation. So I thought that that was a wonderful point, and thank you for the audience to make that point. There is, if you go into Google and you type in 10 top genealogy libraries, a list will come up, and all of those libraries will accept copies of your self-published family history, whether it's memoir or pedigree charts. They're more than happy to accept it. Each one of their websites has information about who to send it to. The Library of Congress, if you want to donate a copy of your family history to the Library of Congress, as I did, they, for some reason, I don't know why, but the Library of Congress requires that you send them 2 copies, not 1, but 2 copies. So if you are going to publish, I would strongly advise, following that suggestion that the audience made, consider donating it to those major genealogy libraries, because that's where it's going to be preserved forever. You know, if you have 20 copies and you gave it to 20 different family members, well, 100 years from now, none of those 20 copies might exist any longer. You know, they may have moved or lost, or, you know, maybe their house was robbed, or, you know, their house might have burned down, or whatever the case may be. There's a million reasons why your book will never, you know, fully survive in your family. So definitely consider donating copies to the major genealogical libraries. And of course, Family Search is more than happy to accept a digitized copy of your book. And even if you have it in paper form, a lot of their family history libraries are willing to digitize it for you, and they will put it on their website under digitized books. You have to sign a release form through the LDS Church in order to do that. But it's simply a matter of just, you know, it doesn't make you lose your rights. It just makes them not liable for publishing it, or actually not publishing it, but for reproducing it in digital form. So anyhow, so there's so many different options out there that Dorothy so wonderfully covered in today's presentation. But I'd like to encourage you to take that extra step besides writing and also preserving. Long-term preservation is definitely a goal of all the 20 years of research that you dedicate your life to. You don't want that to go to waste by, you know, just putting it only in your relatives' hands. You know, definitely you want to put it into the hands of libraries that will be good stewards of that information for many, many, many hundreds of years to come. So with that, let's see here. Do we have any more people who, if you have another question, please go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll give it a few moments to see if anyone does. Okay, Dorothy, I don't see any more questions in the chat box. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very, very much for your wonderful presentation. It gave me a lot to think about. And I will invite the class. I'll invite the class to stay online if you'd like to work with me, because we still have 1 more hour of class to go. The class goes until 2 p.m. Pacific time. So if you would like some research help, I'm more than happy to stay online for another hour and work with you individually. And if you are not going to stay for the next hour, you can go ahead and click on the red hang up button. And, oh, hold on. Everyone's saying thank you, Dorothy. I'm getting a lot of thank yous here. Very, very interesting, they're saying. So with that, Dorothy, I'm going to say thank you very much. And I'll be in touch with you again next week with a copy to the link to the presentation, so you can use it for your local society if you'd like. And I'll also be sending you a thank you note next week as well.
Okay, well, thank you.